Good morning, Professor Tan Eng Chai, NUS President. Professor Chen Su-han, NUS Deputy President of Research and Technology. Deans, esteemed professors, and faculty members who are joining us here, both here and online over Zoom. I'm Han Ming, your MC for today morning. I'd like to give everyone a very warm welcome to the NUS Symposium on Artificial Intelligence. This symposium brings together faculty members from all over NUS to share their experiences, difficulties, and solutions to the challenges of teaching artificial intelligence, data science and analytics to a wide range of students. We'll start things off by welcoming Professor Mohan Kankahali, Deputy Dean of the NUS School of Computing, to give his welcome speech. Professor Kankahali, please.
President Tan Eng Chai, Professor Chuan Chen, many of our distinguished colleagues from campus, and my colleagues from the School of Computing, and other students and faculty members and staff members attending this event. A very warm welcome to you for today, where effectively we are having two events. We are, in certain sense, President Tan is going to inaugurate the NUS AI Lab, and also we are having the first NUS AI Educational Symposium. Just to give you a little bit background, NUS AI Lab is not new. It was actually conceived by my colleague, Professor David Su, back in 2019. And, this was the time when, the AI activity in Singapore really took off with AI Singapore. And I think Suhan is very much involved in that. So we also thought that we need to consolidate the activities in the school and also, in certain sense, around the university. And that's why we established the NUS AI Lab in 2019. And we are going to have this inauguration in an alternative universe in somewhere in early 2020, but you know what happened in 2020. And therefore, fast forward 2 years later, we are doing it now. And but I think better late than never. And I think more importantly, I think it has given us much more clarity in moving forward. What is our vision, our goals. And that kind of brings me back. I mean, I'm not going to talk more about the AI research. As I said, AI Lab is not new, and AI research in NUS is not new. We have at least 5 decades of experience in this area. And I think my colleague, Professor David Su, will talk more about it. But let me talk about the other event which we are having today, which is the Symposium on AI Education. And to me, I'm very personally kind of witnessed this issue. In 2018, when Tsinghua University celebrated its 60th anniversary of the establishment of the computer science department, they had a global symposium on computing education in Beijing. So I was one of the invitees there, and we had some very interesting discussions out there that what is the evolution of AI education in the various computing schools and computer science departments around the world. People were all complaining, rising enrollment not complaining, I guess they were telling about the problems of, or the challenge of addressing the issue of rising enrollment in computer science and computing in general. And also how our educational offerings should also be more connected with what the demands are there, both in terms of the intellectual area of AI and also analytics and data science, but also how to interact more with industry. After 2018, again, they had a next symposium in 2021, which was in November, but this time it was a virtual symposium. And again, I was invited and I participated in that symposium. And in fact, I was on a panel discussion also. What struck me is some of the challenges we are facing at NUS School of Computing and NUS is actually faced by practically every university in the world. What was more striking was everybody is floundering. Nobody has a good solution. And everybody's saying this is a problem. And I think the problem is very simple. A lot of work in AI and data science and analytics is impacting not just computing, but practically every sector of the economy. And as a result, there is a demand in every school and every faculty for AI education, for analytics and data science education. And people are kind of grappling with question is, should the computer science or computing related departments only hire these people, or every department should hire AI and data science people? Should modules and courses be offered by only the computer science or computing schools, or by every conceivable department or faculty on campus? And nobody has any good idea. And people are thinking that we'll start some experiments. That's what the discussion was in November 2021. And to me, what struck me is NUS, we are already doing some of these experiments. And in certain sense, if we can put together our collective wisdom and brain power across the campus here, then I think we can be a thought leader in how to manage AI education in universities, in data science and analytics education in universities. With this spirit, when my colleague, Professor Colin Tan, and they all came with this proposal, let's start off with a symposium as part of this inaugural event, and we can discuss some of these issues. And I don't want to steal the thunder from him because he has some very concrete ideas since then, and these are actually being initiated and already started on campus. So I think there is a unique opportunity here for NUS to be a little bit bold by doing some experiments. And maybe we will fail in some of these experiments, but I think it is worth trying these experiments and establish our leadership intellectually in terms of research, in terms of the educational kind of pathways for our students, and also for continuing education. And also, the third thing which I mentioned is the interaction with industry, which also is a very important component of the NUSAI lab. So with these ideas in mind, kind of many of these things which we are thinking of in 2019 have actually got further crystallized during the pandemic. I guess amidst all the Zoom meetings and all that we've been doing. So I'm so glad to have this first, to the best of my knowledge, the first in-person event or a hybrid event we are doing in the school. And we are delighted to welcome you here and hope you will have a very good interaction today because we have some exciting talks and panel. And more importantly, these conversations and these experiments will continue much beyond today. And we look into the spirit of partnership, especially with the other schools and faculties who have most graciously and kindly participated very enthusiastically here today. So thank you so much for coming. And I am particularly excited to what comes after this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kankan Hali. Now, it gives me great pleasure to invite our guest of honor, Professor Tan Eng Chai, NUS President, to give his keynote speech, as well as to officially declare the opening of the NUS AI Lab. Professor Tan, please.
Well, good morning. And I fully echo what Prof. Mohan has mentioned, that there aren't many sort of universities that know what to do, but we have to be bold. We just have to start doing something, and we also have to know how to fail fast. If it doesn't work, then we change. Right. Mohan Kankahali, Dean of NUS Computing; David Su, Director, NUS AI Lab; distinguished guests and colleagues, I'm very delighted to join you this morning to mark this significant milestone, the official launch of NUS AI Lab, or NUSAIL, and the opening of this inaugural NUS Symposium on AI education another important topic which I'm very passionate about. Although NUS AI Lab was established in 2019, we are marking its official launch in 2022. In the short period since its establishment, it has laid strong foundations in its mission to be a center of excellence in AI research, education, and practice, with a focus on human-centric AI that will empower people to work together with AI. The NUS AI Lab community has grown to comprise faculty, staff, and students from SOC, as well as members in the academia and industry locally and internationally. The work of the lab undertakes is critically relevant to NUS and also, if I may say, Singapore, as we have emerged as a global leader in AI research. For example, our Smart Nation research cluster, which SOC has played a very important role, has actually more than $1 billion in active research grants. The Smart Nation initiative is, of course, one of Singapore's key thrusts to capture the opportunities of the new digital age. And AI has been identified as one of the key technologies, and is expected to grow its capacities and extend its reach deeply into many aspects of our lives. So besides high-impact research, NUS is fully engaged in leveraging the transformative potential of AI across many core domains of education, research, even enterprise, and administration. You may be aware that with the help of the school, we have started a basic AI competency course for all my 4,000 administrative staff. So in our new educational framework, which stresses flexible academic pathways and interdisciplinary learning, we have introduced general education modules on analytics, data literacy, and AI. And in our push towards technology-enhanced learning, we will be employing AI-driven learning analytics that closely tracks to ensure the progress and also stronger learning outcomes. Now, we have also adopted a whole of the university effort to raise the digital competency skill sets of our staff and faculty in preparation for a digital future where sound planning and decisions will require a firm understanding of digital technologies as well as resources. Now, many of you would have attended the data literacy program, and we have since rolled out the AI competency course to equip staff with the skills and knowledge to create smart systems and also applications using modern machine language learning and deep learning technologies. Here, NUS AI Lab focus on human-centric AI and its active research on responsible AI, incorporating social, ethical, governance, and regulatory considerations will enhance NUS ability to really offer holistic and integrated solutions to the challenges and opportunities posed by AI. NUS AI Lab is also working closely and collaboratively with many departments across NUS, as well as industry partners, to shape discussions, share ideas, and promote stronger understanding of AI's role and capabilities. With a wide proliferation of modules related to areas of AI, data science, and analytics across NUS, it has become important that colleagues across various departments and faculties to work in sync to ensure that knowledge and practices are shared and are in accord. As such, SOC has also unveiled the Rosetta Initiative, which aims to bring together all faculty members in NUS who teach such courses in the spirit of dialogue and collaboration to leverage on each other's strengths and to collectively pool and share resources to push NUS AI education capabilities to new heights. So it is therefore appropriate and exciting that together NUS AI Lab is also holding the inaugural NUS Symposium on AI education, bringing together faculties for a lively and invigorating sharing session on AI education experiences and ideas in NUS. In a field as fast-moving and as complex as AI, NUS AI Lab, the Rosetta Initiative, and through events such as this symposium, it can all play an integral role in encouraging dialogue, promoting stronger understanding of AI, as well as charting directions and ideas for high-impact research, education, and applications. So on this note, I hereby declare the opening of the NUS AI Laboratory. Congratulations.
Thank you, Professor Tan. May I invite you to remain on stage? May I now invite Professor Kankan Ali, Dean of the NUS School of Computing, and Professor David Su, Director of the NUS AI Lab, to the stage for photo taking. Professor Kankan Ali and Professor Su, please. Thank you, Professor Tan and Professor Kankan Ali. Professor Su, may I invite you to remain on stage to give an introduction to the NUS AI Lab. Professor Su, please.
I think I'll take I follow President's lead and take off my mask. Not that I'm concerned about my face, but I'm worried that my breath will fog my glasses and I don't see any of you. Thank you, the President, the Deputy President, our Dean, and all the colleagues. Thank you so much for coming to support us. I'm really excited to tell you about NUS AI Lab, we call it NUSAIL. The idea of NUSAIL started almost 2 years ago as a self-initiated, bottom-up effort among the AI faculties at the School of Computing. And we received generous support from the school and the university against the backdrop of this exponential growth in AI technologies, which has changed the research landscape as well as our daily life. However, things have not always been this good, this hot. Today, AI is in summer. AI has gone through multiple winters before, and it will again go into winter in the future. However, at the NUS, at the School of Computing, we have excelled in our AI research. And more importantly, we turned our research into life-transforming new technologies. 10 years ago, when AI was in partial winter, our faculty members developed the AI tools for retinal image analysis and applied it to the diagnosis of diabetes-induced eye diseases. This system is now deployed in many hospitals, in Singapore, in Manila, in London, in Montreal, and benefiting many people around the world. Our faculty members are also leading up the effort in taking up the AI Grand Challenge to reduce the healthcare risk for people in Singapore, namely the 3H, high blood pressure, cholesterol, and sugar levels. We are also giving policy advice to the government and as well as international organizations to help improve the health of people here and abroad. People play a central role in AI research. We believe that's the future of AI technologies. The design of AI technology must be aligned with human values, and AI technologies must co-evolve with humans and expand human capabilities and skills. NUSAIL is devoted to this vision of human-centered AI for the people, with the people. As a first step, we created this new research program, The Other Me, TOM, or TOM. TOM is a wearable situated AI assistant. It's embedded in a pair of smart glasses, which we can all wear. It communicates with us through the natural language to understand our goals and preferences. It collaborates with us to develop a solution. And since it's in our smart glasses, it sees exactly what we see from a first-person point of view. It understands what we try to do and try to offer suggestions and useful tips whenever suitable. AI assistants today already exist in our mobile phones. Right? Google Assistant, Apple Siri, Amazon Echo, they connect human to the AIs. However, there's a disconnect with the physical world. Tom is trying to connect all these three things together, AI, physical world, and the human, so that it will bring us to the new era of wearable situated AI assistants. Not so far future, every one of us will have Tom at hand to help us in our daily life and work. It will give us stepwise instructions when we prepare the food, when we apply the first aid, and it will give us these instructions and help us based on the situation at hand. It will also help coordinate the work of our team technicians, or maybe robots as well. Humans and AI work together and work as a team to maybe assemble or maintain an aircraft engine. Tom will also help the visually impaired people when they arrive in a new place to navigate and explore this new place. In order to create such AI assistant, we need to enable Tom to have the ability to be able to see, to communicate in the human language, to reason, to learn, but also to build models of human-AI collaboration so that human and AI can work as a team. We want to put all these together and work towards a synthesis of integrated collaborative intelligence. We have already received a major grant from AI Singapore to support our research effort. We have assembled an interdisciplinary team involving multiple institutions of Singapore, with NUST taking the lead. We also have faculty members from MIT as collaborators. To support our vision of human-centered AI, the school has dramatically expanded the AI area through hiring. In the last few years, we have almost tripled the number of AI faculty members across the two departments of the school. These are some of the new faculty members that have recently joined us. At the NUSAIL, we organize our research into three major themes: embody the AI to connect AI to the physical world, interactive AI to connect AI to the people, and also trustworthy AI, so that AI technology is reliable, it is fair, it is understandable. We want our AI technologies to be deployed, to be trusted, to benefit many people. We also created a unique and exciting piece of experimental space called Robot Living Studio. It will help us to explore the future where human and AI will work and live together. The history of this space is still relatively young, but it has already received many interesting visitors. The former senior minister, the minister, but also young children coming from abroad to find out what AI is and what we are doing with robots. We want to expand our research into a broader base of excellence. First, through closer connection with the industry. Today, we will launch the iConnect program in collaboration with the SOC Industry Relations Office. iConnect is a membership-based industry-affiliated program. It will accelerate the two-way exchange between researchers at the NUSAIL and the red-hot local tech industry. As a university research lab, we are constantly aware of our mission to educate and to bring up the next generation to advance the future of AI technologies. We are supporting the school's educational mission in many different ways. For example, today, the NUSAIL faculty members organized the keynote panel for the educational forum, and I look forward to see you right after this in the keynote panel. Finally, X. X stands for that thing doesn't exist yet. We will create it. The only upper bound is our imagination. I'll end with this old Chinese saying, 1,000-mile journey started with a single step forward. NUSAIL is our first step towards this vision of human-centered AI. I would invite all of you to join us on this journey to shape the future of AI. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Su. Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Colin Tan, co-chairperson of Vojeda, to the stage to share more about Vojeda and the symposium. Dr. Tan, please.
Thank you, Han Ming. Good morning, NUS President, Professor Tan Eng Chai, Deputy President, Professor Chen Su-han, Dean Mohan, esteemed guests and colleagues. I'd like to thank you, first of all, for making the time to come here and join us. It's really a great honor to be hosting all of you today. Now, AI has been around us for a very long time. We particularly have seen expert systems in areas like medicine and finance since the late 90s. But today, with the proliferation of powerful computing resources and the ubiquitous availability of mobile data networks, AI has exploded and permeates society in ways that we have never expected before. Now, just a couple of examples. We see AI on a consumer level in our mobile phones when we say, "Okay, Google," or "Hello, Siri." Facebook and other social media sites use AI to curate our browsing habits, to curate our interests, to study our interests, and to curate content for us to view and to keep us engaged. AI-dependent safety technologies like autonomous emergency braking and lane keep assist are now widely found in many, many cars, even cars that are a little less expensive. And these have enhanced both driver and pedestrian safety. In the US, a high percentage of mammograms yield false results, leading to up to 1 in 2 healthy women being told that they have cancer. Using AI, mammograms can now be scanned 30 times faster with 99% accuracy, reducing the need for unnecessary biopsies. With such a great proliferation of AI in so many aspects of daily life, it is only expected that there is a wide availability of causes in the areas of AI
data science and analytics here in NUS to many, many students of different backgrounds and disciplines. As of January this year, there are well over 100 courses from almost every school and faculty here in NUS. This large number of courses is a very positive sign that our university is on the forefront of ensuring that our graduates remain relevant to industry and to social needs. And yet, this also presents some potential challenges. For example, there is a potential of a lack of a baseline on what students taking these courses should know about fundamental AI and what this lack of baseline may mean to employers. The other potential aspect is a possible lack of a duplication of effort as well as resources. But there are also many opportunities that are being presented to us today. With AI, data science, and analytics courses being offered in such a wide range of disciplines, we can share a rich set of use cases, case studies, and most of all, difficult and expensive to obtain data sets to enrich the learning experiences of our students. Now, let me just give you a brief example. I teach the deep learning part of a class called Introduction to the Internet of Things. While teaching our students the fundamentals of AI and deep learning is straightforward enough, it becomes a major challenge to provide them with a fun and yet realistic set of meaningful problems to solve. A collaboration with perhaps the Saw Swee Hock School of Public Health, the Department of Economics, or even the Division of Industrial Design could potentially lead to projects that are engaging and exciting to our students, while at the same time remaining socially relevant and impactful. It was for this reason that Rosetta was born. Rosetta was started by a group of 15 AI lecturers from the Department of Computer Science and the Department of Information Systems and Analytics here at the NUS School of Computing. Although Rosetta was started here in SOC, we hope to bring into Rosetta faculty members like yourself who are involved in teaching AI, data science, or analytics courses all across NUS, so that together we can address the challenges that we face and leverage the opportunities that are available to push AI education at NUS to new heights. The Symposium on Artificial Intelligence Education is Rosetta's inaugural event and its first steps in this direction. We are greatly encouraged by the keen participation of so many colleagues from all across NUS. You will hear from them today through the morning keynote panel discussion on AI education in a fast-moving world, the 5 talks that we have lined up for you, and also the afternoon town hall on the challenges that we face designing AI courseware. After the symposium, Rosetta is proposing 2 initiatives. The first is a 2 modular credit course on AI fundamentals that each of you can tailor to the needs of your students, particularly for non-computing disciplines. We are also proposing a repository of AI-related courses so that we can share our resources across the university, and we would like all of you to be a major part of this. On behalf of my co-chair, Dr. Lek Xiang Hui, and the members of the Rosetta team who have worked hard to put today together, we thank you once again for coming, and we hope that you find all the sessions useful to your teaching endeavors. Thank you very much again.
We will now proceed with our keynote panel on AI education in a fast-moving world. Our panel members for this morning are Assistant Professor Angela Yao, Assistant Professor Desmond Ong, Associate Professor Kan Min Yen, and Assistant Professor Trevor Carlson. The panel will be moderated by Professor Lee Wee Sun, Head of the Department of Computer Science here at the NUS School of Computing. Along the way, if you have any questions, you may also scan the QR code on the paper in front of you to key in these questions onto our Padlet. Now, may we put our hands together to welcome our panel members onto the stage. Panel members, please.
Do we have a seating?
Okay, so welcome everybody to our panel on AI education in a fast-moving world. AI has grown explosively in the past decade. Large corporations are using AI to gain competitive advantage. Startups have been sprouting up, touting AI as the cure-all solution for ideas that they are developing. AI has become central to fintech, medtech, edtech. It has become a general-purpose technology. No less than Vladimir Putin had said that whoever becomes the leader in AI will become the ruler of the world. The opportunities abound, but AI has also brought new challenges. For example, in privacy, fairness, transparency, in the age of massive data. At the university, we are in a unique position of teaching the students who will be going into this fast-moving AI world. How do we best teach AI to these students? How do we prepare them to face the opportunities and challenges ahead? I'm very pleased to have with me 4 panelists to discuss these issues. I'll first like to go around the panel and ask the panelists to say a few sentences to introduce themselves. Then we will go around and get the views of the panelists on these issues. So let's start with you, Trevor.
Thank you so much. So my name is Trevor Carlson. I'm an assistant professor here for years at the School of Computing. I work in systems, which means that I'm building hardware and connecting software and hardware to provide an energy efficient, fast, and performant solution. And in the teaching aspects, what we do is we teach students how to use our computer architecture fundamentals and bring that into the AI world. How do we solve AI problems from a hardware, from a software perspective? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Min Yan Khan. You can just call me Min as the minimum function. So I teach natural language processing. That's my area of research. That means how to use AI to understand and synthesize human language to communicate with people. And I have the privilege of teaching in SOC, our machine learning course, for several years. Done quite a few experiments with flipped classroom, not so successfully in some cases. So very happy to be here to learn from our success stories as well. So yes.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Angela Yao. I'm an assistant professor here at the School of Computing since 3 years. And I do research and also teach computer vision and also deep learning.
Hi, my name is Desmond Ong, and I'm an assistant professor here in the Department of Information Systems and Analytics. I'm trained as a cognitive psychologist, and my research covers both human empathy and emotion understanding, as well as how we can translate that to build machines that can recognize our emotions, as well as all the ethical challenges that come along with that. So here at SOC, I teach data science to first-year undergraduates. The enrollment is growing every year, as well as an AI course on effective computing to upper year undergraduates.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I would like now to go around the panel and ask the panelists what they think the main issues are in AI education. Right. So maybe we'll start the other way around.
Okay. So for me, I want to just touch on 3 quick points that I hope will be food for thought for everyone. So first of all, I think is the importance of infusing AI ethics into our education. Right? So we've seen the impact of AI in our daily lives, and we've also seen some of the negative impacts that can happen, right, when AI is deployed kind of incorrectly or without proper considerations. So I teach this example in my class. In 2016, there was a piece of investigative reporting by ProPublica about a software called Compass used in the United States in the criminal justice system to predict criminal recidivism. So what that means is that this software tries to predict whether a given defendant will be likely to reoffend in the future. So this piece of reporting showed that this software was very heavily biased against African Americans compared to their white counterparts, right? And the output of this software is being used by judges to make life-changing decisions like parole, sentencing. So, right, and there are so many of these examples now, right? And it's such that the top AI conferences now are requiring ethical impact statements or the equivalent to accompany the research that's submitted to NeurIPS, AAAI, ACL, and so forth. And I think that we need to bring this AI ethics education even down to the undergraduate level. We have a compulsory AI ethics course here at SOC, but as the instructors can tell you, one of the big challenges is getting our NUS students to care, about this non-technical aspect of this subject. So how can we infuse more of this AI ethics into our technical courses, right, and teach about the societal impact that AI is having as well, right? Every single project that our students start, they should be thinking about what are the downstream consequences. So that's the first point. And the second point, which is related, is when we teach AI courses, it's very tempting to focus on all the good that AI can do. Like, wow, it's so awesome. But I think it's also timely to teach our students about, what are some of the boundary conditions? What are some of the failure modes, right, where AI can fail? Last week, we had a talk about from a CS student at Stanford, Ko Fang Wei, and he was talking about how AI models can fail very badly when they are used on data sets that it was not trained on. Right? So he started off with a real example of a US healthcare company that trained a predictive model on a small subset of hospitals. And when it was generalized to the larger set of hospitals, right, the performance was actually really, really bad. And this translates to diagnoses or incorrect diagnoses, right, and a lot of wasted time and effort. So as we are teaching our students who will be going out and deploying these models, right, not just to be, like starstruck with how awesome AI can be, but also be very critical, right, and evaluate their models, especially knowing when they will fail. And lastly, the last point that I want to make is that, here we have a lot of faculty gathered from all over NUS. And this is because AI is going to impact everybody, even our students who don't write code, right? We're going to have doctors and lawyers and geographers who will have AI impact their domain of expertise. We're going to have these doctors and lawyers will go out and they will interact with systems that can help them to do automated diagnosis, automated legal discovery, right? How should these non-AI professionals deal with how AI will impact their chosen line of profession? Should they trust these systems? Right? When will they fail? So and in fact, tomorrow morning, I'm talking to a group of MOE school leaders on how AI will change education. Right? They are really concerned about how AI will change the way that teachers interact with the school, with their students. Right? How will the school environment change? Right? So I think that today we're talking a lot about how to teach AI to students who want to learn how to code, but I think we should also think a little bit about AI for non-AI practitioners, right? What should they need to know at a high level? What's the hype, right? What's real, what's not? What are the considerations, right? As we're moving towards a future with AI. Thank you.
Thanks, Desmond. Angela?
Okay. I have two slightly more, traditional points on AI education. I think for me, the first one is what I've seen firsthand when I teach Introduction to Neural Networks and Deep Learning in my class, which is how to encourage our students to link deep learning and AI as a tool to solve their problems. I think often because of the way these classes are presented, we focus on the very traditional success models, which happen maybe in computer vision or natural language processing. And so they think that deep learning is associated only with computer vision or natural language processing. But actually, it's really a tool for analyzing data and looking for patterns. And these are actually very traditional topics as well. And so what I would like to encourage more in my class and also encourage the students to think about is how can I apply this now to the problems that I see in my everyday settings, and also when they go out into industry or maybe they go out and found a startup, how can they bring these tools to solve all of the problems that they encounter, any sort of problem that they encounter where they can gather data. And then piggybacking off of that is when we bring these tools of AI and deep learning into our real world settings, I think at the moment what is rather not accounted for sufficiently is how can we bring the human into the loop? All of our data that we work with, all of the problems that we solve, it's changing and it's constantly evolving. And this aspect, I think, is also a little bit at the moment ignored because we work with these, especially in research settings, we work with very static data sets, benchmarks, and we constantly look at how can we push our research and our algorithms to improve on this one data set, right, or this one benchmark until the next benchmark comes along. But when we deal with actually solving these problems, we have a human in the loop here to maybe adjust the problem setting to fit better, or maybe to work better towards our tools. And I think this part is largely, I think, pushed to the wayside in favor of just pushing the benchmark performance. And so if we can integrate that as part of our education and also as part of our research, that can also, we can see a lot of benefit in improvements as well.
Thanks, Angela. Min?
Thanks. I'd like to build on those topics. I mean, I think we'll get back to the core of AI education soon. But I think one of the difficulties we have with AI is it's going so fast, as Angela pointed out. So I really believe we need to go faster to go slower, meaning that we are always optimizing our research, our impact, but we need to use the time that's being conserved or freed up by those fast types of research to really step back and think about the long-term aspects and the way we train our scientists. For example, nowadays you see in China and other places a push for AI education even at the primary school age, right? And so some of the ideas of AI systems and how to think about learning systems and overall like reinforcement learning, all of these simple ideas which have technical names but really are quite simple ideas that even primary school students can understand, but not the mathematics of it, just the concepts of it. These will be already primed when they come to university education. So we really need to step back and think about how all of this landscape is going to change the way we teach AI education in the future. I think a lot of us, as Mohan said and as Angchai said, we are at a race to try to figure out what to do, but we cannot neglect the long-term stability issues about how our peers, our next generation is learning. You know, we face this every day as educators, right? We learn new toolkits, we learn that the current generation, the analogies we have been using for the last 5 years or even 18 months or even 2 months are now outdated, right? So we still have a lot of catching up, and it will continue to be that way. You know, the speed improvement means that there will always be this constant lag time between us, but we really need to save some time for ourselves to make sure that we can address this.
Yeah, Trevor?
Okay, great. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about was how things are might be different for adult learners than maybe the students we have, undergraduates and graduate students we typically have in class. So, you know, one idea is to think a little bit about what kind of expectations we might have for some of the students coming in. And I think, you know, from my experience, I've, you know, brought in a PhD student, for example, and she had quite a broad background in optimizing algorithms at work. right? And so now she could come in and start jumping into the problems that we had, right? But did she have all of the fundamentals of the mathematics that Min was talking about that we would expect someone to be able to do when you're doing fundamental AI research, right? I think we're going to see a diversity in the types of backgrounds that we see. And this is going to create challenges for us as educators. I just wanted to touch on something a little bit with respect to adult learning theory, because adult learning theory, talks about and looks at adult learners in a different way. And so there are a couple examples like how the students can be more independent. They're independent learners. They know how to learn. They know what drives them, right? That's quite interesting. And also they have the experiences that let them associate the new things that they're learning with the previous examples that they have in their lives. One of the things that also comes up is that these adult learners have problems they want to solve. They have very specific problems. Maybe they're coming in from industry, maybe they're still working at industry. And typically, we don't adapt the classes to be able to handle customized problems and solutions, right? And so this is a little bit what Angela was talking about, a little bit what Min is talking about. How do we provide, and maybe also what Colin was talking a bit about earlier, where we want to bring in customized solutions from all over the university that specifically target the kinds of things that the students want to do to make sure that they're engaged with the work. So this is going to be a challenge. Typically, when I'm teaching my classes, we have sort of the fundamental building blocks that build up to something I want to make sure the students, understand, right? But then having this extra piece in there, we typically don't add that, and I think that's going to be both interesting and challenging to do. The other thing that's interesting is that the adults are ready to learn and motivated to learn, and they know what they want. They're here for a purpose. They're here for a reason. We need to make sure we address that.
Great, thanks, Trevor. So there's been a lot of interesting issues being raised up. But before we talk about that, I think I want to talk about something that's central, right, to the university. Like, what should we be teaching them? What should we be teaching the students? And we have many different groups of students. So I want to focus for a short while and ask the panel to address what the curriculum, essentially, what should we be teaching them? So let's start with undergraduates, right? So what constitutes the foundation, the theories, the tools, and the core curriculum of an AI education let's start with a technical specialist at an undergraduate level. So maybe Min?
Okay, maybe I'll start and kick this off. I think, if we go back in history and we think about other revolutionary technologies that have been around, I mean, if you go back 100 or so years ago, we had automobiles, right? So automobiles were quite a new technology. They changed the way how things encompassed both for economics as well as transportation. And so when we think about that, like, what would a person need to use an automobile correctly? We have people who are the technicians, the automobile technicians that need to be able to service automobiles. So I think this is closer to in kin to what Wee Sun is asking. Okay, so if we think about not using AI, but actually inventing AI, what are the core pieces of information that we need? We need obviously fundamental mathematics, so probability and statistics, linear algebra for the current wave of connectionist machine learning, but also programming, right? Because they need to be able to program these technologies, right? So I think those are the fundamental building blocks to start with, but definitely a much broader base, like Desmond had related to how to use it. Angela related about how to integrate it into real world use. I think those are things that encompass more of a broad mindset for how to use AI. So I'll start there.
Maybe just a short follow on. So building the fundamentals is also interesting, right? Because you need to be able to use that in order to discover new techniques. But one thing that we also teach in computer science education is complexity, right? And, coming from a hardware systems background, right, we're having big problems training the largest AI systems today, right? And that has energy footprint implications, systems footprint implications. And so maybe a piece of this is also understanding the implications of the training and the inference components and what impact that will have, right? The same way that we talk about a big O notation, right? Which I think we could pull that over and talk about the systems complexity, right? It doesn't have to be a lot there, but I think it's coming back to societal components. This is another part of that.
Thanks, Trevor. Yes, I think one of our most popular courses is the Systems for Big Data course. Lots of students want to do that because when they go out to industry, they do need to handle the large-scale data. Any other comments on undergraduate curriculum?
So I'll say, adding on to what Trevor said, it's important to have all the stubs there out of your undergraduate education. If you're learning to be a technician for machine learning or artificial intelligence, to have that core mathematical underpinning to develop new algorithms, but also have the stubs to relate it to a graduate education, which I think we'll get to at some point in this panel. Because, as we already talked about, when we train specialists, they go out into the real world, they have to integrate and use these systems with many other human systems, right? So it's very important to have and observe that connection, right? If they learn the curriculum without connection to human contexts, we can develop the wrong type of technology. We can be optimizing for things that we actually don't want to optimize for. I want to make a short seg to talk about, how Singapore's context for AI education is a little bit different. When I read reports about AI education, inevitably they talk about either the US or China, right? And so I feel like the US education is much more of a breadth method of AI education, which is let 1,000 lights or points of light bloom, right? So they have many different ways of teaching AI. Not all of them particularly good, but they're willing to do a lot of experimentation, right? And this is a very big contrast to how China does, right? China is very centric. They have a national curriculum that they established in 2017 and 18, and they've been plowing through this through 5-year plans about how to optimize the curricula to push, huge numbers of graduates, millions of students through the AI curriculum. Right, so I think of their case as more of a depth first search, right? You say, I have an idea, I'm optimizing it, and I'm gonna make sure all of the talent goes through this and it's standardized and I get all the benefits of standardization. But you miss other local peaks of excellence, which the US may be able to find, right? I think there's a balance, like all the other types of AI algorithms that we have out there. There's no way that we would say, okay, just go for breadth or just go for depth. There's a mix, and you have to be able to strategize and figure out in the context of what you're doing, which strategy makes sense. Okay, and I really think that's one of the strengths of Singapore is that we are in a place where optimization is a key part of our heritage. You can think about 10-year series if you have children going through all of this, but also the flexibility to work on a very different scale. That benefits. So I think that is where we're going to see a lot of key. And that connects back to my previous argument that we need to save time to think. If we don't save time to think, we won't be able to make this balance, in education. And I see NUSAIL as an endeavor in this part. This is why I'm very glad to be here in Singapore, especially at NUS, because we do have enough time to think about larger societal issues. We're not pinned to performance indicators.
Thanks, Min. So I think those are really, really interesting and important points. And I hope Rosetta will take that up in further discussion. So I want to move on to graduate education. So I think for the PhD, we sort of have an apprenticeship model, right? So most of us know how to do that. But at the master's level, like what should we be teaching at the master's level? So, Angela?
Yeah, so I'm happy to take this question because I also teach the master's level deep learning course. And here I see two extremes that we are catering towards, and of course everything in between. On the one end are the graduate students who come here for PhDs who are sitting in these courses. And so some of them are maybe already experts at this topic. Others want to gather some fundamentals and some tools to help them in their research, even if their research is not directly in deep learning necessarily, or neural networks or so on. And then we have the other extreme, who are the master students who actually work in industry, and then they come for a master's course in the evening, which is actually a really hard balance that they're trying to manage. And so as Trevor was saying, they're really trying to look for specific tools to help them solve very specific problems in their work, and trying to think, or maybe they're even sent here by their company to gather ideas to how to revolutionize and change their way of working to introduce more AI into their company. And some of these are actually SMEs also. So they're trying to gather these ideas. And this is a very different objective than we see on the other end with these research-oriented students, right? And so in that sense, we have to, I think, take a very fine balance between one is the practical and the hands-on. How can I direct the topics of AI and also of deep learning towards problem solving? How can I gather ideas to say, well, this is the type of problem we're looking at, so it makes sense to do classification here, for instance, versus say regression and so on. And then on the other end, for students who are working in who are more research-oriented, to really understand, well, this is where this algorithm came from. How do we derive the foundations of this algorithm? How can I link this back to the traditional ideas that it came from? I mean, in that sense, I think this is going a bit off tangent, but also to let our students understand, because I think what we read in the popular media is that AI is going to be this fix-all that came out of nowhere now. But actually, the foundations and the underpinnings of AI have been decades in the building, right? And so for these students who are more research-oriented to also be able to link this back to, well, these algorithms that we're working with actually piggyback off of other ideas in data-driven machine learning, which have been around for several decades. And that actually piggybacks off of maybe statistics and other foundations in mathematics. So all of this is all linked together, right? And for the research-oriented students, what I think is important for our education is to make them aware and understand that this didn't come out of nowhere, and link these back to the more traditional ideas. So in that sense, I think our graduate education is highly challenging because we really have to cater to these two extreme populations, and then also find a good balance for everyone in between as well.
So could I extend on that a little bit? Sure. So I also teach a graduate module in systems, and part of our work does deal with AI and how to build AI systems, things like that. One of the things that I find helpful for the students is when you try to raise the bar for those students coming in on the industry side and bring them into the research fold, okay? It is a challenge to do this. It's not their native language, right? It's a new way of thinking, right? So what we've been trying to do in our course is build the scaffolding necessary to allow them to understand the primary source literature, allow them to understand how to implement that literature, and how to discuss and analyze that literature. And one could say maybe they don't need to have all of those fundamentals, right? But I would argue that being able to understand how to tackle those problems gives them the tools that they need to succeed in business. Even if initially they might not think they need it, they might find out that later on they need to take that deep dive, and they need to be able to understand the fundamentals, as Angela was pointing out. It's definitely a challenge because these students don't have the same backgrounds they aren't exposed to the same systems research or AI research, right? In our class, we're actually straddling both. So this creates an additional challenge. I think as teachers, the goal from my perspective, or at least one of the things that we try to accomplish, is to scaffold sufficiently, right? And we're always trying to improve that, right? Doing more project-based work, connecting back to their work and to solve problems that they want to solve, and allowing more interactivity in the class, right? Group work in the class, things like that. So we've been trying to do this, but I still think there's still more that we can do.
Thanks, Trevor. So let's move on beyond the technical specialists, right? So what are the topics that every student in the university needs to know about AI? Right? When we go beyond those who are going to build tools, what is it that they should know? Any?
So as I was saying just now, right, I think that because AI is going to affect all areas of our lives, right? So, and many of our students will not end up creating the AI, but they will be interacting with the AI in some manner, like as an ordinary citizen or as part of their job. So I think that we need to teach some kind of like basic AI literacy, like going along with what Min was saying, right? In China, they're starting really, really young. I think we need to start teaching and this teaching is not about really the mathematics of how AI is going to work, but really about, what are some of the basic concepts? Like for example, a lot of AI today is built on supervised learning, right? And many people think that it's magic, right? You give it enough data and your model can learn to do anything, but actually it's not, right? You want to train an object classifier, you give it a lot of pictures of cats and dogs, and you tell it, these are cats, these are dogs. That's actually how we teach our children, right? How to recognize cats and dogs. But AI, even the smartest AI today aren't as smart as our children, right? They don't really learn to, there are limits to how well they can reason and generalize. And, that might change as research progresses. But I think we need to be able to communicate that with a lot of non-AI practitioners. What are the current limits of AI? Right? It's not magic. It's just a lot of data and a lot of math, but there are limits to it. And they're worried about how is it going to affect their jobs. They're worried about how is it going to affect the economy. They're worried about things like surveillance and how is it going to affect their individual freedoms, right? So I think we need to do more to also dispel a lot of the hype that's out there, right? And to give people more confidence when they are interacting with AI systems.
Thanks, Desmond. So, okay, so any other demographics we missed so far? What about adult learner? Maybe continuing education. Anyone want to talk about what we should teach them? Trevor?
I guess this is Angela and I could probably keep talking about this for a while, right? So, I guess maybe the fundamental question, I don't know what the real answer here is, but maybe the fundamental question is how much of the fundamentals do the adult learners want or need to know, right? I think everyone can agree that solving practical problems is going to be really interesting, right, to these learners. They want to be able to solve the problems that they're coming in from their jobs to solve, or they want to bring back things that they didn't even realize that they could solve, and they want to introduce that into the companies. But the question about how low, right, to the fundamentals to bring the education is the open question, I think. And I think we should push as far as we can, right? We from an academic perspective, having more of the fundamentals gives them more tools, in my mind, right? But the trade-off there is how much time do we really have to do all this? and there's a fundamental limit there. I think there's a bigger discussion that needs to happen to talk about this. I don't think there's a one answer hard.
I agree. I think there's a bigger discussion with moving to sort of continuous lifelong learning, right? Even at the undergraduate level, what's the basics that we need to teach the students so that they are able to build on it as they do continuous learning, right? Okay, I think a lot of us are sort of traditional people, right? We believe you need to do your linear algebra, your probability, so that when you come back for your certificates and so on, you are able to actually take the courses. They do require them as prerequisites. So, Min?
Yeah, I'm going to also make an analogy back to my driving school part. So when we have technology, when it comes in at the beginning, we always want to push towards fundamentals. If you think about driving school in the 19th century, right? You had to learn manual shift, you had to learn how to fix a carburetor, all of these things. People said you needed to know how to do this to operate a car. And that was true, at the early days, right? And I think that change is still creeping up for AI. I mean, nowadays you have automatic shift, right? You don't see that many people learning how to, operate a clutch and all of these other technologies that are from very long ago, right? So my point is that the bar in which we expect people to understand AI education at a master's or utilitarian level will change. It will evolve over time because the toolkits, the technology, the way we teach, the pedagogy will evolve to make certain things necessary and some things obsolete. I mean, if you look at how a driver drives now, we have power steering, we have power windows, we have automatic braking systems that are assisted by AI. We even have, many decades ago, the first example of AI on the road, traffic lights, right? I mean, that was a big deal, to ask a machine, a mechanical object to guide traffic, right? That was scary, right? So that type of semblance of change in the way we teach AI is also going to keep on, not just in the undergraduate education, but also in the graduate one, So I think right now we are at really the beginnings of this, right? If you look back a century ago, we were starting with manual shift. That's where we are, I think, now in AI education. And it will evolve and change, but we need to make sure we are cognizant that it needs to change, especially as we hinted earlier, that we have new primary school students, new secondary school students who are much more attuned to using AI, who have never been without online technology, right? Mobile phones, applications, etc. That's going to force us as teachers to change, right?
If I can add to that, actually, just to throw a different view into the mix is, I think, from a research perspective and also from the direction of being more traditional educators, we're very focused on the fundamentals. But from the other side of it is exactly as Min was saying, when people become attuned to using AI straight from this, having never done without, or having never looked at, for instance, when we think about our connection to the internet, if we look at our children, they have internet pervasive every single day in all their devices, without ever thinking about the fact that we had to actually dial up through a modem to connect and so on. In that way, I think we can also shift towards this idea of AI thinking as a way of problem solving, purely as problem solving and as a tool, without knowing all of the nitty-gritty details of it, much less the foundations and where we derived it from. And I think for a certain seg of the population who just want to know how to use AI, I don't think this is wrong in that sense. We just teach them the thinking behind the problem solving and the tool. This is a tool that can help us. And the trick here, I think, is achieving the balance to teach them, well, as a tool, what can this tool do? What are the benefits and what are the drawbacks? What are the implications of using this tool? And I think that has actually nothing to do necessarily with the fundamentals or the the derivations and so on, and relates more closely to what Desmond was saying about the societal impacts and the implications rather than just the core technology.
Okay, great. So I think it's time to open up questions to the floor. Unfortunately, we can't have sort of live questions. You have to sort of type it in. But maybe just based on the discussion so far, maybe let me just sort of start. And before I go to the list of questions, so Desmond mentioned about ethics and sort of societal impact. And the way we teach it in the School of Computing is we have a specialized course. Right? So I want to ask, is that the right way to teach this, or should we be integrating the teaching of sort of ethics, societal impact into our technical courses, sort of teach them at the same time, right? So that they can see them and be able to sort of contextualize it as they do the technical things. What do you guys think? Which way? The way we do it now is you have a separate ethics course. Right?
Okay, I'll answer this and try to be quiet for a while. So I teach our natural language processing course and our machine learning course, and I take the same viewpoint as what Harvard has decided, which is that we want to integrate ethics directly in the curriculum. And I think this is really important because when we're learning the subject material of AI, we still have to be constantly reminded about where these fallacies and implications need to have a direct impact in those technologies. Let me give you a case in point. So in natural language processing, we have this key technology called word embeddings. Okay, a new way of training representations of meaning for words. And the way that the systems are really taught now is they go out on the web, they find lots of data about text, and they learn all of the associations about these things. And unfortunately, you already know the text on the web and on other archives is not clean. They can be quite xenophobic, they can be quite racist, misogynist. And those pieces of data are then used through the math that's involved in AI to reflect what we use in actual natural language technologies. Okay, now we can teach this in the AI ethics course, which is perfectly fine. I have no problem with that, but it needs to be reinforced as and when they're learning the subject matter of that specific curriculum, in my case in natural language processing, to make sure that they have some reinforcement of those objectives, right? So when we teach about meaning representations, and I first teach them how these systems learn meaning, and then I say, well, let's flip to the back of the coin. Where does this land us? And we see that, by looking at large sets of reviews online, that we see Mexican restaurants are, 2 points lower than Italian restaurants. Why is that? Because the dialogue about Mexicans in news in the US has been quite negative. And so, it has a direct effect on, rating restaurants. It's silly, right? And that also is pertinent to other things, like if you have a name of a person and that person has an African American name, because African American names in US media is often related to crime, and has a negative sentiment, even without looking at anything else, just the name by itself. So I think this is a very important systems issue, but it's also something that we need to reiterate to our students, especially those who are here to solve problems, right? They're here just to solve a problem, but they may not be aware of these larger issues. And it's our job as faculty to say, this is a problem you want to solve, but let me expose you to a wider aspect of what you're doing and how that impacts our society.
Thanks. Desmond?
Yeah, so I'm also of the view that while we can have a separate AI ethics course that goes into case studies and spends the entire semester on it, I agree with Min that I think this should be interleaved into the way that we teach our courses. So I teach a course on affective computing, so using computers to recognize emotions. So the way I structure my course is that it's a project-based course. Halfway through the semester, after I've covered the technologies, and then I go into, I have one whole lecture on ethics and I discuss it. And then for the remainder of the course, as we examine applications, as we discuss the class projects in class, I keep bringing this up and I keep challenging students to think about some of the privacy implications, some of the unintended negative implications, right? So like one case study that I have is, we want to bring AI into the classroom, right? We want to have AI that can like detect the engagement or the frustration or the boredom of students, right? So that we can do targeted interventions and bring the student back to class, re-engage the student. But what are some of the downsides of that? Like you can think of some teachers using that as a proxy to penalize students for not paying attention. Then it just becomes yet another way to penalize our students, right? And so I get them to start thinking about it, and I even force them to write about it in their project reports. And a lot of them come up to me and say, I don't know how to write this, right? But I think this is part of learning, part of challenging them to think, right? Not just about, the math of how to do it, but when they actually build something, what impact will it have, right? So that's the way that I structure my course. I think that it should be integrated, into our courses, into our project work, into internships, right? Just a part of our conversation, so that it doesn't have to be a separate topic, but something we keep in the back of our heads as we, are making things that actually impact people.
So just a quick follow-up is, so in our class, when we have the students read primary source literature and come back, one of the key things that I'm looking for the students to do is to provide feedback on things that the authors have not mentioned in their paper, right? So we call these critical reviews, and they're looking at them critically. But one of the things that I think I will be integrating now is, we tend to look at performance implications, energy efficiency implications, and environmental implications. But there's also and those are not usually mentioned in papers, right? But now the follow-on would be, what are the ethical implications here? So that's really interesting. That's all.
Thanks, Trevor. I'm glad we affected somebody.
No, it's starting off small, right? Keep moving.
But this is great, right? This would actually require all of us to do if we are to sort of successfully integrate all these things into our courses. Okay, so let's go on to the questions. I'm just going to, I think, randomly pick a few up. How much time do we have? A lot. Oh, okay. Okay, so maybe let's start with this. How do we balance the need for AI knowledge and domain knowledge in our education? How can we pursue a sustainable model of collaboration between faculties from different disciplines to this end? Anyone? So this is one of the reasons we are here, right? I think. Do we know how to do this?
I'll start to say that I think we need to be very humble. I think AI, because of its current urgency and demand for training, puts a lot of stress on AI educators to push curriculum. And we need to step back a little bit and realize that there's a lot of knowledge and domain expertise that's not going to be reflected in the data. Right. So even though we can gather a lot of domain-specific data, there is so much wisdom and knowledge from other faculties about how to interpret that data that many times we ignore it. Right. We say, oh well, the machine can learn that. You don't need expertise from a radiologist or a surgeon or anyone else to interpret medical imaging. And that's certainly not true. We can definitely use all of that expertise. I think it's also hard to engineer a good pathway. I think Angela talked about human in the loop, right? So being able to be able to close full circle instead of just saying, okay, we gather the data, we train a classifier system, and then we deploy it. And that's the end of the story. No feedback necessary. Thanks very much, and be able to put that loop into practice.
Okay, no.
If I can add on to that, I mean, at the end of the day, when we're using AI as a tool in our work, in this example of what you were talking about, the radiologists and so on, these are still tools designed for people. And I think this human factor is often neglected to the wayside of how much more can we push the advancements of the algorithm or the technology. And so I think it's my hope that also with this establishment of NUSAIL, because we're looking at human connection here, or this human-centered AI, that we can put that back into the forefront as well. And understanding how people think and interact with tools is actually a very critical part of making these effective as well.
Thanks, Angela. So, okay, maybe let me just pick the first question, which is sort of related, right? It's should not computer science, non-computer science students learn to code? So, yes, should they learn to code?
If they've used Excel, then they've already learned just some basics, right? You're saying coding, right? Just general.
That's the question. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think from a fundamental perspective, right, the coding is transformed many different areas, right? I'm not an expert on this piece, but you know, if you just think about people coding things in Excel, right? All of a sudden, now people are putting together math formulas and complex math formulas and solving real problems that way, right? And so I think the question here maybe is talking more about, okay, Python, C++, something like that, right? But maybe this is that flexible barrier that we were talking about before with Min, where, you know, initially you needed to know C or Fortran or Pascal or something, right, in order to code. And now there's many different ways, right? You can open a browser and do things in JavaScript right on, you know, the browser that you have installed on your home PC or laptop or phone, right? So things are much different now. So I would have to agree that we need that in order to take the next step, which is enable people to create custom AI solutions.
Thanks, Trevor. Okay, so, the next question moves us, I think, lower from Terence. Actually, it says, does our secondary school curriculum requires updating to facilitate learning AI? Any?
So I'm not familiar with the secondary school curriculum. Maybe the local person can help us with that. But you know, as one thing that I'm trying to do with my kids is integrate AI into the home curriculum, right? So you know, my son is 7, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. I'm sure we can work together to program a drone to wash the dirty dishes for us, right? And let's do that, right? Isn't that just a weekend hobby project, right? That we do, you know what I mean? So, but maybe someone else can speak to the local aspect.
Anyone?
I mean, are your kids in secondary school yet? No,
no, they're not. They're taking PSLE, so that's another like head breaker. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think in secondary school they already learn linear algebra. I mean, my knowledge is very outdated since from when I was in secondary school. But you know, we do learn some linear algebra. I do think that more and more, at least from what I read in the news, that more and more schools are incorporating some like robotics courses, some other kinds of like exposure courses to expose our secondary school students and our JC students to some of these like programming fundamentals. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean,
so I think some of the curriculum may need to change, but I don't think it's a revolutionary change. It's more like an evolutionary change, meaning that we have always thought about problem solving as a basis for a lot of what we do in computational technologies, including CS. And we have already started that early in Singapore. in many ways, we see a lot of outreach from universities and tertiaries and the secondary schools to teach computational thinking, right? And so it just means that I think for AI, sometimes we need to think about how to coach the language in which so that the AI learnings can be there if they need to go and they want to specialize in AI or machine learning. For example, the idea of reinforcement learning, like learning through experience, right? Or learning contrastive learning, which is learning from both positive and negative examples, right? So those things people understand sort of fundamentally without needing the mathematical principles behind it. You can be exposed to the math later on, and it certainly doesn't hurt to have some of the fundamental maths taught early, right? So you see China going into probability and statistics and linear algebra a little bit earlier and having a centralized curriculum around that. I think that makes sense if you're optimizing, again, just for that level of early maturity for that subject matter. But I think it could be something, again, H3 or H2 learners want to specialize in, not necessarily pushing everyone if they're not interested, right? But I think having that computational mode of thinking is a lifelong skill, right? We always say, can we get our learners to be more interested? Can we get our learners to be able to apply to a broader set of problems where they can transfer the ideas into another domain? And that really requires that computational mode of thinking without saying aligning to a particular domain experience. And so I think, as we talked about with graduate education, is idea that if you have a problem is to be able to find the tools and techniques in the broader spectrum and then apply them at the right level of convenience, right? So understanding and practicing that depth, I think, will be very important. And we can start that early.
Thanks.
If I can add to that, I think here we're talking about curriculums, right, at the secondary level. But I think we can push this even earlier if we just think about this mindset of problem solving. We want to inspire our students, and this can be done even earlier. Inspire them to solve problems and inspire them to imagine and think about the possibilities. Like what Trevor is saying, if I want to inspire some young children, because they come up with these neat ideas of saying, as adults, maybe we think, oh, why would I need a drone to wash my dishes? It's the kids that come up with these fun and maybe outlandish ideas that actually lead towards progress and this spark and this jump for us to make, rather than this very progressive, I need this tool, I need to learn linear algebra first, I need to know probability and statistics first. And if we focus so much on this, we've taken away the fun and the inspiration for these kids to imagine what is not possible today, but this is what we actually really need to push for progress also.
Okay, thanks, Angela. So, I think this is a related question, but maybe let me also set a bit of context. Like in computer science, we have problems of not having enough, I think, female students, right? So I don't think we have fixed that. But let me ask this question from the audience. How can we make AI topics approachable and inclusive for everyone to study? I don't think we have fixed it for computer science, so I don't know whether AI is different.
Well, I just have a comment on this. So there was a really interesting study done in Sweden. And basically they started with the topic that was, I believe it was like structural engineering or one of those, bridge building kind of thing. And what they did was they changed the name. All they did was change the name. They called it society building. Okay. So when they changed the name, right, they saw a huge uptick in the number of female applicants, right? And the point was, I think that many people, and I have experienced, for example, someone I know, she didn't know some fields even existed. And if she did know that, she would have applied and, what was the quote? I would have loved to build bridges, right? But and then she said instead she went to become a teacher and she loves her profession. But the point is that these kinds of things are raising awareness, right? And but the interesting thing was simply by changing the name, it exposed more people to it, right? And they said, wow, there's things I can do to really change society. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I wonder whether AI has that problem. Whether any comments on the question? Like, how can we make it more inclusive?
So yeah, I don't know.
Changing
So
the name is.
but you're right. So names are one of the pieces. I'm not saying that this is necessarily AI problem. What I'm saying is that, for example, there have been common themes that people have talked about, such as, maybe if we had more mentors, right? People like me, right? Not me personally, but people who want to come in to CS would like to see people like them in CS. And so the mentorship thing is just one of the pieces, right? But there's a host of things. This is a larger CS issue that we're not going to solve today.
I guess the tech industry has this problem, right? The tech industry, which AI is, I guess, a part of.
Anyway, just going back to Sweden for a second. When I was there, I saw. So we have, like sanitation engineers, right? Garbage men, okay? Right? So in Sweden, you would see an equal number of men and women doing this job, right? You would. This is from my personal experience. I don't know what the statistics are there, right? But in the U.S., where I grew up, you would not see this happen, right? You would very rarely, if ever, see a woman in being someone picking up the garbage. So it was just an interesting dynamic, right? And I think I'm not saying that they've solved these problems. I'm just saying that it's definitely more societal. It's definitely more, cultural, and looking to those other societies could be a way to think about this.
Great, thanks, Trevor. I think we are out of time. So, yep. So I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for the wonderful discussion.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, panel members, for the wonderful and thought-provoking discussion. We'll now be taking a 10-minute break. Please return at 11:15 a.m. for the first of our talks today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So welcome back again to our symposium. We now start on the talk segment of the symposium. And the very first talk that we have is by Associate Professor Zhang Wei from the Department of Communications and New Media. She'll be speaking on civic AI education, embedding civic values in learning computer science. Professor Zhang. Thank you.
Timing myself. First I have to confess that I'm very nervous looking at our president and all our colleagues across the university talking about something that's rather new but also very important to me. A few words about self-introduction. I am an associate professor working at the Department of Communications and New Media. I have been working out of the Civic Tech Lab since 2008. Our lab focuses a lot on the civic aspects of technologies, including and especially on information and communication technologies. So we have worked on projects such as online deliberation, citizen science, youth engagement, cultural publics, so on and so forth. We worked with computer scientists, like many of you, food scientists, education scholars, and policymakers. So if you're interested in what we're doing, feel free to have a look at our website, and I look forward to any kinds of future collaboration. So today I'm going to talk about civic AI education. Many of you are involved in AI education. You probably wonder, what do you mean by civic AI education? Do you want to educate artificial intelligence to be civic? Or has AI ever been not civic or uncivil or violating civic values? Well, just now Desmond actually had a great example on Compaq. I thought of using that, but decided to switch to two cases that are more relevant to every one of us. So let me start from the first case. You see a picture of a group of protesters here, right? So these protesters are not really protesting against a dictator or, a corrupt political system. They're protesting against grades, right? Grades that have been predicted or given by AI. So this is a picture taken in 2020 when the UK government decided that we're not going to have a physical university entry exams because, that's life-threatening in a pandemic, right? So they decided to use AI to predict the grades of the students. Then using those grades to decide which universities the students will go to, right? So you can imagine when the predicted grades were announced to the students and parents, they were outraged, right? So they took to the street to protest against the grades. But if you look at the algorithm used by UK government, it was actually quite a complex tool, right? It's not a simple, straightforward algorithm. So it took a lot of factors into consideration: the students' own performance, where the students are from, the schools they are from, right? As well as teachers' predictions, right? So these algorithms were chosen because the UK government knows that, there are problems with human predictions. Teachers tend to have first grade inflation, right? So, second, teachers from different schools are very different in terms of the accuracy they can predict, right? So there's actually some kind of thoughtful rationales behind choosing AI. But if you look closer to the AI, then there seems to be one particular problem that really outraged the parents and students here. That's basically the considerations of the schools past the record, right? So basically, you are an exceptional grade student, but you come from a so school that has had a mediocre history, right? So this student will actually be rated lower by the AI. So here, one particular venue one particular civic value has been violated. That's basically fairness, right? So a great student from a social school might be unfairly treated by the AI. So actually, a few days after the announcement, the UK government had to take back all these grades and stop using these AI predict grades. Okay, so this case might be only relevant to the students, right? But second case I want to introduce here, I guess is relevant to all of us working adults, right? So this case happened a lot earlier. In 2014, Amazon, we all use Amazon, Amazon, right? Amazon introduced an AI-based hiring tool, right? So the hiring tool basically would, use a set of algorithms and predict who the candidates the company should hire. The AI actually will give the candidates a score ranging from 1 to 5 stars, right? If you use Amazon, that's how the users rate the products, right? So after about a year, in 2015, Amazon realized that there's one problem with this hiring AI tool. That's basically the tool didn't really function in a gender neutral way, right? When it comes to technical posts such as software engineers, right? The AI tended to recommend male candidates again and again. So if you look further into the AI, the problem actually lies in the data set that has been used for machine training, right? To train this AI. Well, the data set was basically all the CVs and performances from employees working for Amazon, right? And you can imagine, even the data set is huge with like decades-long history. You can imagine those who work for Amazon are mostly guys, males, right? And that's not just the problem of Amazon, right? It's across the tech industry. So here we see another piece of civic value being violated, right? That's basically diversity, right? If you use this piece of AI, gender diversity would not be guaranteed in your hiring decisions, right? So I use these two cases to illustrate the point that when we say AI violates the civic values, right? But when we look closer, we realize that there are the real problem still lies with humans themselves, right? It's the human who decided to hire guy candidates again and again, right, in the history. So maybe we should educate the humans behind the AI and the usage of AI to be more civic. So this brings back to the traditional notion of civic education, right? So many of us actually have gone through this, right? No matter which country you were born and educated, you will take civic education curriculum. In Singapore, it takes the name of social studies. So can civic education really help us to solve that challenge, right? Well, my answer is not that optimistic. I can tell you civic education itself is also under challenge. But let's first introduce the basic notion of civic education. In civic education, traditional concept of civic education, it's often confined within the physical boundary of a nation state, right? So the education would emphasize the political, legal, and economic systems, right? Operating in the country. So the citizens, right, will be educated by about the rights and responsibilities they have in the country, as well as how the government works, right? So that's basically what we call civic education. But there are a set of rising trends that have challenged this traditional notion of civic education. For instance, globalization, right? So now we have many countries like Singapore where you find a significant portion of residents who are actually not really formal citizens, right? So they are immigrants, they are non-citizens. However, they influence the society they're residing in, right? There are also other countries that have accepted lots of refugees. How do we treat these non-citizens? Civic education didn't really have good answers for that, right? Another challenge is technological advancements, information communication technology especially, right? While these technological advancements actually probably allow globalization to emerge, but we also see lots of challenges. Fake news, online hatred, cyberbullying, all of this have basically challenged our social life. However, civic education doesn't have good answers to solve these challenges either, right? So it seems that the problem, as far as I understand now, is civic education or teaching civic values to the human sometimes are easy to say, right? If you understand civic values or principles as just a set of terms, right? 10 or 20 principles. However, it's very hard to practice, especially when the situations are brand new, right? You have never seen that before. As teachers, it might be easy to just tell your students, what the first principle is, what the second principle is, but your students might be still hard to learn it by heart and really put it into practice. So in order to somehow address that, right? So I went to AI education, right, as a field for answers. Many of us, are involved in AI education. You would know there is a subfield called AI ethics education. So I went through the literatures on AI ethics education and found three approaches, right? Three major approaches to AI ethics education. First is called guideline, right? So you will have basically a checklist, right, of maybe 10, 20 civic principles. So the designers will go through the checklist, check all the boxes to make sure that the design conforms to the civic values. But as you can imagine, these are very abstract values, right? It means that when it comes to actual practices, it has very little influence. There have been research finding that reading these checklists doesn't really help the designers to change their decisions. Also, the designers will have to grapple with their own individual dispositions, as well as the organization's priorities when they actually put these guidelines into practice. So in order to build some kind of a tangible bridge, right, between these abstract values and the actual practices, you see the second approach emerging. So the second approach develops, a set of toolkits, right? Open source fairness toolkits, right? So the designers can use to go through some tasks to figure out, whether the design fits the civic expectations. So the problem with the toolkits is also quite obvious. First, even for the designers, for the technologists themselves, there's a learning curve, right? Steep learning curve. Second, the toolkits sometimes don't really tell the designers so-called mitigation strategies, right? So when they realize that, this particular design might violate a civic venue, but there are no recommendations to fix the problem, right? Lastly, the toolkits are still somehow not very friendly to highly diverse individual situations. So when it comes to these situations, the toolkits are not very helpful either, right? Lastly, the third approach will go beyond the lists and the tools and focus on activities. So these activities often take advantage maybe of a simulation game or maybe a workbook, right? Some kind of role play games to help the designers to understand alternative civic perspectives, to also be educated about the diverse civic venues. Well, many of you come from computer science. You might be familiar with co-design or participatory design, right? So those activities also have been used in educating AI ethics. So I think these are all quite helpful, right? But someone coming from a non-computer science a discipline, I realized that there are at least two limitations of all these three approaches, right? First, it's just focused on designers themselves, right? Developers of the technology. However, we know that AI goes far beyond the development, right? So AI repurposing, AI usage, right? AI monitoring. These people who are involved in these later stage of the process also have to be educated about AI ethics. That's the first limitation. The second limitation I realize is, well, all these education tools, right, are still pretty much just focused on the designers themselves, right? The only so-called actor who has been featured in the process is the designers. But how about other diverse, multiple civic actors, right, who might be contributing to this process, right? Ordinary users, policymakers, right? Can we include them into all these educational processes as well, right? So in order to somehow do that, right? So I go back to my favorite research topic, right? I started as an online deliberation scholar. So I should design platforms for citizens to deliberate on public issues, right? So online deliberation or deliberation is based on this deliberative citizenship, right? The notion of this deliberative citizenship is different from other notions of citizenship because it's a maximal notion. That means it actually requires citizens to participate very actively in the process of decision making. And their participation needs to be informed by good materials, good and balanced materials. Also, their participation has to be reciprocal. That means it's not just you participating. You have to acknowledge others' participation. You also need to be ready to change yourself, right, in front of others. So the individuals needs knowledge, skills, dispositions to do that. But more importantly, they need the institutional support to allow these multiple civic actors to join the conversation at the same time, right? There is a fundamental commitment to a so-called balanced consideration. This consideration, of course, needs to think about your own welfare. However, the consideration will also emphasize the survival or the benefits of the entire community, right? Not just the one individual. So you probably wonder, how do you really do it, right? I introduce a typical process of deliberation or online deliberation here. So I call it probably a deliberative framework of civic AI education. Well, let's start from the first step. So deliberation process often starts from so-called interpersonal deliberation. That's basically deliberation that happens within your own mind, right? So the individuals will be given materials, right? Here I can think of all those guidelines, toolkits, right? That will be very helpful here, right? Given these materials to reflect on their own opinions, and then they are also encouraged to take others' perspectives, to think of alternative opinions and the reasons behind these alternative opinions, right? So after this stage, it will move into interpersonal deliberation. That's basically deliberation among people, right, among individuals. So in this stage, what will be built is no longer just your own quality, right? So you are supposed to show reciprocity to other participants, right? There will be give and take of reasons. There will be give and take of empathy, right? So, and the participants have to be ready, have to be prepared to change their opinions if they agree that the other people's opinions are stronger or more useful, right? So, there will be mutual respect built through this process, no matter whether you agree with each other, right? Eventually, you have to respect that, even someone who disagreed with you is worth their voices, right? So after that, oftentimes there might be some kind of consensus emerging from the process, right? But even we don't have 100% consensus, there needs to be some kind of decisions being made here, right? This decision-making process will make the participants feel empowered. Okay, so I think I'm done with my call for a deliberative framework of civic AI education. Let me check my time here. Am I doing well with my time? Okay, all right. All right, so I'll just quickly flash some slides here. You probably would say what I have just talked about is very theoretical, right? How about practice? I give you a recent case, very recent case that happened just last year. A case about basically deliberation on AI policies in educational systems, right? So this deliberation was held in University of Technology, Sydney by Simon Buckingham-Shum, right? So it's a typical deliberation process. It starts from a so-called mini public, right? The mini public was recruited from the university population and is representative of the university population. There are lecturers, students from different schools, students from different years with balanced gender. So they form the mini public, right? And the mini public, before they went into discussions or deliberation, they were given materials, briefing materials to understand the issue, right? Then they were also invited to so-called expert panels, right? So they are invited to expert panels to ask questions regarding AI in educational systems and got answered, right? After this intrapersonal deliberation or briefing or knowledge building phase, they join the deliberation, interpersonal deliberation, right? So in this stage, their discussions were actually moderated by professional facilitators, right? And they use Google Doc to draft the principles of guiding AI in educational systems. So, they came up with a set of principles. This is one of the examples. There will be a explanation of the principle. There will also be some concrete examples to illustrate individual situations. And eventually, all these so-called recommendations will go into this piece of university policy, right, to become actually a formal policy. So I'll stop there, right? If any of you feels excited by this deliberative framework of AI education, civic AI education, I open my welcome to all of you for any future collaboration. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Zhang, there's a question from the audience.
Oh, okay, sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So the question is, individual good versus societal good. How does this affect AI ethics? Individual good versus society good. How does this affect AI ethics?
Well, actually that's a very good question, right? So, you can change the question to anything, right? Individual versus social AI, social goods for, I don't know, driving, driving policy for driving education, how to drive, right? So yeah, you can actually change that into any kind of topics. You know, what's the idea behind deliberation? I would like to maybe explain a little bit more here. Is basically to expose any individuals to the fact or to the reality that you know, not you yourself are right, right? And there might be a lot of people or a lot of perspectives that are also equally legitimately right, right? So when it comes to AI ethics, right, you know, I start to think about that UK case. So when the Ministry of Education in UK did that decision, they are right in certain senses, right? So they're right because they know that teachers are not precise in their predictions. So we cannot rely on teacher prediction, right? That's right. But they probably are not fully aware of other perspectives that are also equally right, or sometimes more important maybe than just the precision of prediction, right? So I think the idea of deliberation really is that, right, is to build a process to expose all of us, all individuals, their own so-called blind spots, right? And to try to avoid the worst consequences, worst unintended consequences by developing maybe a piece of AI technology. So yeah, that's how I see so-called individual good and social good in terms of deliberation, right? Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Zhang.
Sure.
Okay, next up we have Associate Professor. Thank you. We have Associate Professor Feng Mengling from the NUS Salisbury Hawk School of Public Health. His topic today is When AI Meets Healthcare, Special Considerations and Challenges.
Thanks, guys. Yes. Good morning, Prof. Tan. Good morning, Prof. David, and to all our distinguished colleagues and all the audience online. I'm Meng Ling from Salisbury Hawk School of Public Health, or you may just call me Morning. Quick story behind, because while I was at MIT, for some reason, every time they see my Chinese name, they tend to call me Mei Ling. So, which is too beautiful for me to carry. So I asked them to call me Morning. Right. Jokes aside, right. Today, I'm going to share, based on my humble research experience, on some special considerations while we deploy AI technologies for healthcare challenges. And I think those are very crucial for both our research and also education, right? Especially when we're teaching the next generation of AI scientists. So AI for healthcare, right? Yeah. We have seen many successful AI technologies for various domains, starting from gaming, finance markets, manufacturing, robotics, and of course, autonomous vehicle. But if you've been following the healthcare AI scene, unfortunately, we haven't seen as many success in AI technologies for healthcare challenges being deployed for actual practice as many as other domains. I don't think this is a random coincidence. I think there's some truth behind, right? Based on my experience, again, I do feel that there are very special considerations and challenges while one develop AI technologies for healthcare. And today I'm going to use one of the case study to lead to this discussion. And there's a case study about developing computer visions for healthcare image analysis. And the story begins with $1 million. And it was a while ago, about 2017, there was an international challenge organized by the US White House. At the time, was still under the Obama office. They call all the international AI specialists to develop an AI agent able to read digital mammograms and diagnose breast cancer automatically for a breast cancer screening program. So besides attracted by the prize money, we quickly find out that actually there's a very relevant problem statement for Singapore and also from all the Asian women as well. Because breast cancer is the #1 cancer in the world. And unfortunately, in Singapore and in Asia, often different from the Western world, is that very often when our women are diagnosed with breast cancer, is detected usually fairly late at a later stage. Breast cancer, if we got detected earlier, it can still be treated very effectively and have fairly high 5-year survival rate. Okay, the current gold standard for breast cancer screening and for early detection is through the digital mammogram technology. However, the current workflow to do breast cancer screening with digital mammogram is quite labor intensive because actually it's very challenging for human radiologists to detect breast cancer for these X-rays. It requires 2 independent readings from the radiologists, and then they need to compare the results. If they disagree with one another, actually they may need to engage the third one. And the end result is that, for example, take our Singapore breast cancer screening program as example. It took our women 2 to 4 weeks to wait for the report to come back after their screening. That leads to unnecessary anxiety, and unfortunately, one of the consequences is that they may skip the next following screening because their experience wasn't as present as it would be. But still with that, we are still facing about a 10% false recall rate, again, cause unnecessary anxiety, and also still a 10% sort of missed interval cancer in between these screenings. So definitely we see the need for technology to fill in these gaps. And we were also excited that they provided the largest data set at the time, right, with 640,000 images. And of course, because it was sponsored by Amazon and IBM, they provided 1,000 GPUs to us at that time. It was like a dream come true. So as an AI lab, we roll up our sleeve and we get to work, right? We have data, we have computational power, and then we at that time we built some of the popular models like VGG, Google Nets, and Dense Nets, and REST Nets, and even an ensemble model around these models to train on the image. And even with all the GPUs, right, it took us 2 weeks to train through all the images. Okay, so now moment of truth, right? After 2 weeks of work, our AUC, which is roughly the accuracy of our model, is only about 0.54, which means after 2 weeks of training, all these fancy models of deep neural networks with billions of parameters, nothing more than a random guess. And you must say, like, morning, you're going to lose your job here. Your boss is sitting right in front of you. So we check our leaderboard, right? We are not the only lab that fails to address, like, everyone around the world, about 1,000 teams, everyone's accuracy was about 0.5 at the beginning. Okay, we quickly realized something must be wrong. So we approached our clinical partner, Dr. Hartman, which is also a faculty in our School of Medicine, also a breast cancer expert in the region. And to understand what went wrong, right, and how human radiologists diagnose breast cancer from mammograms. Then we noticed we make a few major mistakes. We make many wrong assumptions. Here are a number of the major ones. First, at that time, the GPU's memory are still quite limited. Even nowadays, the memory is still very limited. And mammogram was internationally captured in super high resolutions. Each image is like 100 megabytes. And with all these neural networks, it can't fit into the memories of the GPUs. So as a computer scientist, we think like we solve the problem, right? We reduce the resolution and squeeze it in the model, hope that it will work. But turns out that was a huge mistake because if you can see on these images, there are all these tiny, tiny bright dots. Actually, these are the obvious examples I pick. In the actual practice, these dots can be so tiny that out of an image with a million of pixels, these micro calcification dots can only occupy like 10 pixels, right? Which means the radiologist has to zoom in multiple times to see them. While the distribution or the strips of this microcalcification are actually very important biomarkers for breast cancer diagnosis. Right, the moment we reduce the resolution and try to fit in the GPU memories, the moment we remove all these important biomarkers. So that was our first mistake. So to address that, rather than squeezing in the entire image, we have to do a divide and conquer method, right? We have to chop the images into small patches, and rather than solving all the image at one go, we have to first detect whether there's any abnormal or malignant lesions in small patches, and later on have another neural network putting all this information together, pieces back together, and to make a collective decision. So that was our first mistake. And the second one is that after many rounds of interactions, even learning the textbooks from radiology, that we learned that actually to diagnose or to make a recommendation for breast cancer from mammogram is never a yes or no easy binary classification problem, right? As we mentioned, it's not easy supervised learning problem, but rather the radiologists need to write about detect about a dozen different lesions in the mammogram, and only considering all these, they make a recommendation after that. So what it means is that rather than just giving us the raw yes or no labels as the 640,000 images the US White House provided us, which will not be enough to make accurate recommendations for breast cancer diagnosis. So we have to come back. Actually, we have to ask our collaborating radiologists to very painfully annotate on every single image. As you can see that sometimes they draw boxes around abnormal lesions, or sometimes they even have to draw very accurate contours to highlight the lesions to help the AI to learn exactly what they should be looking for while they're diagnosing breast cancer. And presently, at the end of that, our AI not only can just give a binary estimation, but also able to highlight the suspected lesions in the mammogram, which makes it more explainable and interpretable as well. And the last mistake we make is that mammograms are always often captured in 4 images, both sides of the breast, and 2 view. The MLO views is from the heart diagonally up, and the CC view is just a top down. Again, as a pure computer scientist, we were treating these images as independent images and trained, so that we are happy that we have rather than 640,000 images times 4, we have millions of images. But the radiologists immediately corrected us and shared with us that they see all these 4 images all together, because they need to contrast from left, right side of the breasts and look at the different views to gauge the shapes of these lesions. So at the end, we actually need to build 4 collaborating AI agents looking at 4 individual images and also sharing information across them. And then 4 of them actually discuss among themselves, right, kind of, and make a collective decision. And fast forward a little bit, all this took us about a year, right, to enhance our AI models, and fortunately, we improved from originally a 0.54 AUC to a 0.9 plus AUC, right? We are the #1 in Asia and top 5 in the world, right? The red cross there on the curve there are the human radiologists. So the challenge is that if our AI model able to beat the human radiologists, that we get that 1 million. So the sad story about that is that we didn't get that 1 million. So Prof. Tan, I will still need my job. But then we are still very inspired by this story, and we are continuing our research here. Actually, one of my PhD students involved in this project spin up a company and has been working with Health Promotion Board and trying to bring this to practice. So up to this point, you must be wondering, so like morning, you're just sharing or showing off your success or sharing some research. How does it relate to education? So we are getting there, right? So from this and many other experience, right, one thing we learned is that artificial intelligence is especially quite true for healthcare applications, are often an abstraction of human intelligence. As you can see here, the boost of the AI performance came in with that painfully and took our human radiologists months to annotate just 1,000 of data points, and that's where we gain the improvements in AI. And also a deeper understanding, realization is that for any successful deployment of AI solution for healthcare challenges, we really need a very close collaborations between our physician and data scientists, right? To avoid scenarios like us to make wrong assumptions about the data, to make a wrong assumption about the problem statement. Also on the other end, right, the learning should be both ends. For the physicians to understand the boundaries of AI, as many of our colleagues has mentioned earlier, or the possibility of AI. Sometimes they didn't know that's possible with the current AI technology, so they didn't know what kind of problem statement that they can imagine. However, the interaction between these 2 communities are not that common, right? It's a global problem, but locally, just looking at our NUS, right? School of Computing, where we are now, and the School of Medicine, if you know our map well, there are a number of hills between these two schools, right? And our students don't kind of bump into each other that often. And also, the physicians are always busy with their clinical works. Our data scientists are busy with codings and developing an algorithm. So we do need a platform to cultivate this kind of interactions a lot more frequently. So to solve that problem, so in 2018, I organized an event called the Healthcare AI Data Dawn, together with our partners from MIT and also all the healthcare clusters from Singapore, top universities from the region like Tsinghua from China, Seoul National University from Korea, Chulalongkorn from Thailand, etc., and a bunch of AI companies, as you can see there. So what happened during this AI Data Dawn is that we intentionally recruit half of our participants to be physicians and the other half to be data scientists. And we'll ask all our physicians to propose a AI problem or problem statements that they see from their daily clinical practice that they think that AI solutions may help them to solve. And then the data scientists will be fall into groups to the problem statements and the teams that they feel passionate about or they feel connected to. And then we provide all these teams with real-world clinical data, right? They're provided by all our clinical and academic partners. And since we have many the cloud companies like AWS, Huawei, and Intel and NVIDIA, we also, over the weekend, the event lasts only from Friday to Sunday. Over the weekend, we also provide them almost infinite computational resources to allow them to test their ideas over real data and sufficient amount of computational power. The pleasant thing we observe is that although it was just a weekend, we have managed to cultivate about 50% of them will turn into a productive team and continue to work their idea throughout the following 1 or 2 years to end up in a publication, or some of them even end up in startup companies. Right. But this event, we are doing it every year now, but it only happens once in a year, right? So once in a year definitely is still not enough, right? We need a lot more of such kind of interactions. So in spite of the success of that one, the Healthcare Data Dawn event that happens annually, I developed a course called Analytics for Better Health, which is a scale-up version of the Data Dawn. Again, I recruited half of my cohorts from School of Medicine, School of Public Health, and the other half are School of Computing or School of Engineering, right? Besides about half the time of lecturing, teaching them the fundamentals of AI and also the unique considerations in healthcare data and healthcare ecosystem, majority of lecture times, I actually allowed them to fall into teams again, cross-disciplinary teams, and to formulate the problem statements that they feel passionate about, and again, to try to build a proof of concept solutions with real-world data. With 13 weeks of interactions, again, we are very happy to see some real friendships and collaboration teams are being built up. And here are some of the teams showing off their mechanical keyboards after they done a one night of hackings, right, or codings over their problem. But still, right, it's just one course. It only lasts 13 weeks, right? So I do believe that we need that more often. And my personal vision or my personal hope or dream is that we can have this throughout the entire 4 years of our undergrad educations, or 2 or more of our graduate educations. But unfortunately, I myself don't have the perfect answer for this, and I don't think it should come from one individual or individual school, right? I think we need to gather our collective wisdom here so that we can create some creative, innovative programs to allow more of these interactions that become more a daily routine rather than some 1 year or one course of activity. So with that, I would like to end my talk and invite, it's basically a call for collaboration. Anyone that shared a similar idea, similar vision, do reach out, drop a line to me. Happy to have coffee and discuss with you and see how we can make some of our dreams happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sung. We have a question from a member of the audience. Do you have any suggestions to ensure continued engagement among students and faculty members across different schools, cross-faculty projects?
Engagement. I feel like that's beyond my pay grade, but okay. So my strategy is to begin with, like I say, I'm very open. I call for all the like-minded faculties and students, or even students, to join us first, right? I think as any new ideas or as any disruptive programs happens, we will first gather the early adapters, right? The early believers as the core group first, and then slowly go ourselves, right? And use our success stories, our inspirations, the lessons we learned through sharing to grow our influence and gather more interest with other faculties and students. I hope that softly address the query. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? All right. Thank you, Prof.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so right now I think it's the part of the day that all of us absolutely love. It's lunchtime. So just before you go for lunch, I just like to remind everyone that we are still subject to safe distancing. So the lunch venues, right? It's outside here, the tables here, as well as Cerebro, which is on the right side. Okay, right side of the we'll have our helpers to guide you there. So please, groups of at most 2. Okay. Now the other important thing is that we have those of you who sign up for the lab tour. Please gather at the Com 1 lobby, level 1 at the lift lobby, right, at 12:45. Okay, so that's for the lab tour. Okay, so thank you very much, and we'll see you again at 1:30. We have much more exciting talks again. More exciting talks again later on. As well as we have our afternoon panel, right, which is a cross-faculty panel, discussing the difficulties in creating AI curricula. Okay, so see you again at 1:30. Thank you.